Every year, 32 franchises, coaches, GMs, and fans all gear up together for a season with one ultimate goal in mind: winning the Lombardi Trophy. And every year, teams look to get the right players through the draft, free agency signings, or get the better end of the deal in a trade. They hope to get their coaching situation right, whether it's an offensive-minded guru or a coach that can put out one of the most terrifying defenses to give the gurus on the other side of the ball headaches all game. But there is no doubt that the quarterback is the most impactful player out of all 22 positions on the field, and if you don't get that position right, it can negate nearly all of the other great moves that you've made at almost every other position or coaching hire. And there's a narrative that gets thrown around a lot when people talk about teams like the Ravens or the Eagles, when people are convinced that the style of game Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts play cannot win you a Super Bowl. When fans identify a quarterback's talent more so with their legs than their arm, they say you can't win with a running quarterback. And so today we're going to take a deep dive into this philosophy. We've seen some of the all-time great quarterbacks with the most rings and MVPs like Brady, Montana, Manning, and Roethlisberger do most all of their damage from the pocket. But does that mean that it can't be done any other way? Are teams like the Ravens and the Eagles having all of this misplaced trust in a style of football that is inevitably going to disappoint them come playoff time? Or is this narrative simply wrong and they have just as good of a chance to win as a traditional style quarterback? We are going to cover all of this today and finally get to the bottom of things. There's obviously a lot to talk about, so let's get into it. First, let's talk about the proven method, and I think that's fair to say it that way because since the turn of the century, Brady, both Mannings, and Big Ben account for 13 of the 22 Super Bowls. They all have multiple, but other guys like Kurt Warner, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, and Patrick Mahomes all have one, and are all great quarterbacks in either Hall of Fame caliber or fringe Hall of Fame players. But rounding out this list, guys like Brad Johnson, Trent Dilfer, Nick Foles, and Joe Flacco all have one as well, but aren't seen as great, especially compared to the rest of the guys on this list. But out of all 22 of these guys, not one would be categorized as a running quarterback. So is this just case closed? Well, although this is a good argument that you'll hear people bring up, there's also so much more to this conversation. Like, how many of these Super Bowl teams had an elite defense? How many times have we ever seen a team build an offense around a quarterback that runs it like this? What about some of the not so great quarterbacks who have a ring? And during the Super Bowl, when the stakes are the highest, what style of play can you depend on the most? And we're going to try and find an answer to all these questions, starting with the first one. Of the 56 Super Bowls played, 49 of the champions have had a top 10 scoring defense. That's 87.5%. 30% of Super Bowl champions have the number one scoring defense, and 61% find themselves in the top 5. There's only been 3 Super Bowls ever, including last year's, where both teams finished outside the top 10 in scoring defense. So what we're saying here is there is equally, if not an even more prominent trend in having a great defense in winning Super Bowls than having a great pocket passing quarterback. So it might not matter how wildly talented your quarterback is, if you neglect to focus on the defensive side of the ball, you'll probably continue social distancing from Mr. Lombardi. And I think another large part of this quarterback discussion is the lack of sample size we actually have. Teams of the past were so rarely ever built around a running quarterback. Even one of the best running quarterbacks in the history of the NFL, in Michael Vick, never really had a system like Lamar has now, like Jalen Hurts has, this RPO and a read option game that are so heavily integrated in their team's identity. Whereas Mike Vick, if he wanted to run, it was mostly him breaking the structure of the play and making magic happen. And as we've seen more teams running read options, quarterback leads, RPOs, we've seen some quarterbacks have success with it. Looking to 2015 when Cam Newton made his historic run, I would say this is the most recent example of a run-heavy quarterback being in the Super Bowl. But in my opinion, Cam was simply neutralized by a great Broncos defense. Even though the great Peyton Manning got his second ring, he was essentially in a wheelchair throwing 10-yard wobblers down the field. But this makes us ask, would the Panthers have been better off with a less mobile but more accurate throwing quarterback? Was the MVP Cam Newton ever going to be able to bring their team to the promised land? Well, this brings us to the Trent Dilfer conversation. And maybe not everyone remembers Trent Dilfer with the Ravens, as it was 20 plus years ago and he's not talked about that much, but let's talk about someone more recently. Jimmy Garoppolo with the 49ers. Now, I know he didn't win a Super Bowl yet, but the 49ers had a 10-point lead in the fourth quarter of a Super Bowl, so in my opinion, it's obvious that this was a Super Bowl caliber team. But more importantly, let's look into the NFC Championship matchup right before this. They upset the Green Bay Packers, only throwing the ball 8 times the entire game. Now you tell me, in that Super Bowl and in that NFC Championship game, who do you think Kyle Shanahan would have rather had at quarterback? Jimmy G or Lamar Jackson or 2015 Cam Newton? I think we all know the answer to this, as we saw him trade 3 first-round picks to get Trey Lance. He knows Jimmy wasn't asked to do much passing-wise, but they had the running game and the defense that was good enough to win them all these games. And we see yet another example of this with Jared Goff. They had a devastating rushing attack with Todd Gurley and a super solid defense. Asking Goff to take advantage of the easier passes off play action, this offense would have been so much more deadly if Jared Goff was a threat to take off with his legs. But in the Super Bowl, I think Jared Goff, with his poor 19 of 38, 0 touchdown, 1 interception performance, and Jimmy G's 20 of 31, 2 interception performance in their Super Bowls, for both of them to be within 1 possession late in the fourth quarter is very telling. It tells us that their teams were much more reliant on their defenses and their ground game, and they were able to overcome poor quarterback play in these given games. But this led McVay and Shanahan to find replacements for these guys who are more dynamic, whether it's a gunslinger like Matthew Stafford or a freak athlete like Trey Lance. They knew what was more important to winning a Super Bowl, as they saw themselves get so close, and they decided that they just need to be slightly more dynamic. But this leads us into another conversation, because let's talk about the Super Bowl specifically, because Jared Goff and Jimmy G didn't struggle in every single game they had, but why did they have a hard time? Well, in the Super Bowl, nerves are going to be at an all-time high, and Jared Goff even said in an interview that they use brand new footballs, and that's the biggest thing that took him by surprise, and it took him a while to get used to. A lot of times in the Super Bowl, a quarterback can get off to a slow start, and it can take some time for the nerves to settle in, but this really isn't as risky if you can get right into a consistent ground game. Like boxers will tell you, it takes 1 hit for all the nerves to go away, and it's go time. Peyton Manning found out the hard way against the Legion of Boom, as it took him almost 2.5 quarters to get in any sort of rhythm. In the 2021 season, there were 266 fumbles lost, but 441 interceptions. Turnovers in a Super Bowl can be devastating, and the ball is much safer on the ground. But not only this, a steady run game can drain the clock, and if your team is constructed in a way where it has a great defense, which according to statistics, if you're in the Super Bowl, it probably is, a game can go in your favor very quickly. And this is exactly what we saw on the Niners in this NFC Championship game. Now, I'm not saying this is the only way to win the Super Bowl, obviously, as there's a whole argument to which method is better, but we've seen it done with pocket passing quarterbacks for the past 100 years. But I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Niners win the Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson. The Rams win that Super Bowl against the Patriots with Lamar Jackson. And I talk about Lamar, Cam Newton, and Jalen Hurts because people identify them as a runner more so than a passer. Obviously, people consider Josh Allen, Kyler Murray more of a dual threat, but kind of a pass-first guy. But I also in this video didn't talk about a guy like Taysom Hill, because with Lamar and Jalen, I think you do at least need to have the threat of being able to pass it in certain situations and be accurate, which people consistently don't give Jackson and Hurts enough credit for. I think Taysom Hill is just as limited as Jimmy G is, just on the complete opposite side of things. So if we're looking at offenses who are run heavy and you have a quarterback that's a big part of the run game, can you win a Super Bowl? In my opinion, there's no doubt that you can. But just how we started this video, a quarterback can ruin almost all of the great things your team did, but it can't fix everything that your team did badly. Even if you have the MVP or the guy at quarterback, more than likely it's not going to matter who it is if you don't have the defense. And as we saw in Patrick Mahomes' second Super Bowl, if you're missing some key offensive linemen, talent isn't going to matter. It seems that there are multiple ways to have success, but defense wins championships. And no matter how cliche or old this saying is, it doesn't make it any less true. And I absolutely don't think that the Ravens and Eagles fans have trust in the wrong place. If Trent Dilfer can win a ring with the Ravens, so can Lamar Jackson. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure to like this video if you like videos like these. Make sure to comment down below what you think. And make sure to subscribe if you enjoy daily sports content. Thank you guys so much for checking out the channel. And as always, I will see you all tomorrow. Peace!